I sat motionless at my desk, the soft hum of servers filling the silence around me as I stared at the group chat screenshots glowing from my laptop screen. I read them once, twice, then again, each time slower than before, as if my mind refused to fully register the betrayal. The messages were never meant for my eyes. Someone must have slipped. Most likely Dylan Carter's assistant. He was known for being painfully conscientious, the kind of guy who lost sleep over typos and mistyped calendar invites. Whoever it was, they had forwarded the chat logs to my anonymous inbox, the one I'd set up under a different name years ago for situations just like this. Dylan meeting set for 10:00 a.m. tomorrow, finalizing the Echo Wave acquisition. Chloe, do we bring Avery in? Dylan, she's not really family. Chloe writes she'll just start preaching about equity again, like it's biotech, not a commune. Dylan, exactly. That pitch about shared ownership, total embarrassment. It's a boardroom, not a high school civics club. I slowly lowered my screen, locking my jaw as the weight of those words settled into my chest. The irony would have been hilarious if it didn't sting so deeply. Because here I was sitting on the 48th floor of Novacor HQ in downtown San Francisco, the nerve center of one of the most revolutionary biotech automation firms on the West Coast. My firm. I was its founder, its principal systems architect, and its majority stakeholder. And my step-siblings, Dylan and Chloe, had no idea who they were really dealing with. For nearly 5 years, I'd operated in the shadows of the industry, letting the product speak louder than any PR campaign ever could. Journalists dubbed me the invisible disruptor. Investors called me ahead of the curve. But my step-family, they still saw me as the awkward girl with secondhand shoes and big ideas that didn't match her bank account. I was the outsider, the other daughter. They never imagined I could build anything significant, let alone the very thing that would undo them. It all started back when I was 17. My mother had married William Carter, a charismatic and well-connected biomed consultant whose name opened doors in the biotech world. Along with William came his 2 perfect children from his first marriage, Dylan and Chloe. They were the kind of polish that came from prep schools, tailored blazers, and curated summer internships at Fortune 500 companies. They weren't just a step ahead. They were a marathon ahead, at least in appearances. I was the tag-along, the extra piece that didn't quite fit into their glossy family portrait. William once told me at dinner, in what I'm sure he thought was a compliment, "Avery, you'd make an excellent executive assistant someday. You're so detail-oriented." He smiled like he meant it kindly, like I should have felt flattered. Meanwhile, while Dylan networked over cocktails with venture partners and Chloe bounced between European biotech conferences on discovery tours, I worked night shifts at a local diner and taught myself neural systems engineering through open-source programs and virtual labs. That infamous pitch they mocked. That was my last attempt to help Carter Gen Solutions, back when I still believed they might take me seriously. I walked into that boardroom armed with research passion and a plan to decentralize equity, to incentivize innovation across departments. They didn't just shoot it down, they laughed me out of the room. Literally. 2 months later, Novacor Biotech was born. Now, years later, they were preparing to sell the same failing company they mocked me from, and they were doing it unknowingly to me. My vision for Novacor had always been clear: create biotech solutions that prioritized people, not just profits. I imagined AI systems that streamlined diagnostics and made medical technology accessible, ethical, and sustainable. Investors thought I was too idealistic until I wasn't. Within 12 months of launch, we landed the Silverline Health Systems contract that CarterGen had banked its entire expansion strategy on. Within 3 years, we were their fiercest competitor. And now, after months of strategic acquisitions and covert investor consolidations, I was about to buy the company that once called me delusional. CarterGen was falling apart. Years of nepotism, excessive spending, and clueless branding had eroded its value to dust. Key contracts vanished. The board was panicked. Then came Novacor with an offer that felt like a miracle, a perfectly crafted lifeline too good to refuse. What they didn't know was that the anonymous CEO behind the bid had insisted all communication flow strictly through legal teams. Dylan and Chloe never questioned it. They assumed some eccentric billionaire in stealth mode wanted to turn CarterGen into their next trophy asset. They had no idea. A ping flashed across my screen. Reminder, emergency board vote. 3:00 p.m. I had requested that slot 3 weeks earlier, right when Dylan and Chloe blocked the time for what they thought was their big pitch to the ghost CEO of Novacor. In reality, they were prepping for an audition they didn't know was for their new boss. I opened my drawer and pulled out a weathered photo of my younger self, 17, standing beside my mother at Lakeview Point Park umbrellas, raised against the rain. She passed away a year later. William remarried in 6 months, and Victoria, his new wife, erased my mom's name from Carter Jen's website before the ink dried on the marriage license. "You're not a kid anymore," Victoria had told me coldly. "You'll have to make your own way," and I did. I built what she tried to steal. I tapped my earpiece. "Jenna, are we green?" "Yes, Miss Lane," she answered smoothly. "Legal's standing by. Board just needs the signatures. And the Carters still believe you're a retired robotics scholar from Stanford." I smirked. They had been utterly charmed by the fake Nextech Digest profile we seeded last fall, featuring a fictional silver-haired tech recluse with deep funding ties and a mysterious resume. It was exactly the kind of elite, old-world inventor Dylan idolized. "Make sure the boardroom feed is recording," I said. "I want every second on file." I stood and walked into my private restroom. The woman staring back at me from the mirror wasn't the scrappy girl they once ridiculed. Chin-lifted navy blazer, perfectly tailored lips, calm expression, sharp. I adjusted a pair of subtle, rimless glasses more for psychological effect than function. They created just enough distance to hide who I used to be. Miss Lane Jenna's voice came through the intercom, steady and efficient. "The Carters are here. Boardroom 2C, feed is live. Shall I send you the stream?" "Yes. Open it on my laptop," I replied. The screen filled with an overhead view of the sleek glass room. Dylan and Chloe, still smug, still flaunting startup cool outfits like they were presenting at a TEDx salon, were seated confidently at the head of the table. Dylan leaned in, whispering to Chloe and flashing his phone. She rolled her eyes and laughed with that painfully rehearsed shriek. "Can you believe Avery applied here?" Dylan snorted. "As a systems analyst, Novacor wouldn't even open that application." "Bay Area Technical Institute," Chloe snickered. "That's tragic." "Some garage startup in Redwood," Dylan added. "Sad." I didn't react. I didn't need to. That resume. That was mine, a decoy I'd planted through a controlled LinkedIn leak and a carefully crafted trail. Bait. They thought I wanted in. They never realized I owned the building. It was 2:25 p.m. Showtime was near. I took a slow, grounding breath. What happened next would change everything. If you're hooked so far, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, because this reveal is one boardroom twist you won't want to miss. "Jenna," I said into the mic, "let the Carters know the meeting will start early. And when you introduce me, use the name Miss Ray." I smoothed my jet black blazer, collected the final acquisition packet, and walked toward the moment I'd been preparing for, since the day Victoria said I didn't belong. 17 years of being belittled, overlooked, and underestimated. It all came down to this room. This was the moment, the one I'd envisioned through 1,000 sleepless nights and quiet Sunday afternoons when the world didn't see me. As I adjusted the rimless glasses perched just lightly on the bridge of my nose, I thought of my mother, her laughter, her quiet strength, and the spark in her eyes the day I showed her the prototype of my first neural interface. I was only 14, brimming with nervous pride, my fingers still trembling from soldering the last circuit. "Legacy," she had whispered, brushing my hair back from my temple, "isn't handed down like jewelry. It's built brick by unwelcomed brick, by the ones who are never invited to the table." That whisper had become my mantra. Jenna's voice pulled me back, smooth and steady in my earpiece, "Ready when you are, Miss Ray." I glanced one last time in the mirror. My reflection was calm, composed a quiet storm, wrapped in a tailored black blazer and understated resolve. My shoulders straightened, and with deliberate poise, I began the walk toward Boardroom 2C. The polished floors caught the rhythm of my heels, echoing like a verdict down the corridor. Through the glass, I caught sight of Dylan and Chloe Carter, still lounging in their false sense of superiority, their laughter sharp, entitled, completely unaware that their kingdom had already been claimed. Jenna stood waiting outside the door, her composure as crisp as the first day I hired her. She was more than my assistant, she was my anchor, one of the only people who knew the full truth. "Shall I announce you?" she asked, the hint of ceremony laced with personal pride. I nodded. "Let's begin." With that, Jenna opened the door and stepped forward, her voice slicing clean through the ambient murmur inside. "Mr. and Miss Carter, allow me to introduce Miss Ray, CEO of Novacor Biotech." As I entered, the air shifted. Dylan and Chloe's expressions transformed with poetic precision, first composed, then confused, and finally the pale slap of recognition drained the color from their faces. "Hello, Dylan," Chloe, I said evenly, every syllable steeped in the kind of calm that frightens far more than fury. I took my place at the head of the table, the chair their father once ruled from, and laid down my folders with careful grace. Chloe blinked. "This has to be some kind of joke." "No joke," I replied, letting the corners of my lips tilt just slightly, though your earlier remarks on my application were genuinely amusing. Dylan leaned forward, his voice cracking slightly. "You can't be Miss Ray. You're just—" A disappointment, I finished for him, one brow arching with surgical precision. "No, just the woman who worked while you both coasted on names and nepotism." I flipped open the top folder, revealing the terms. Novacor will acquire Carter-Gen Solutions for $2,400,000,000. Select departments will merge. Executive roles will be restructured, effective immediately. Chloe's palm hit the table, her bracelets rattling like chains. "You lied to everyone." "I protected what I built," I said, locking eyes with her, until she finally looked away. "Style doesn't win here, Chloe. Substance does." Dylan clenched his fists, his voice rising in desperation. "Victoria's going to hear about this." "She already has," I said softly. "She just didn't know the offer came from me, but I look forward to seeing her expression." There was silence, then the kind that wraps around a moment like velvet before the blade drops. "What do you want from us?" Chloe's voice had lost its edge, brittle, now chipped like porcelain. "Want," I exhaled slowly. "I already have it. What I'm offering now is grace." I slid 2 folders across the glass. "New roles better aligned with your aptitudes. Dylan, Assistant Manager of Client Support. Chloe, Junior Operations Coordinator. There will be salary adjustments naturally, but you'll be eligible for the development and wellness programs you once mocked." Chloe gawked. "You can't be serious?" "Entirely up to you," I said coolly. "But your non-competes are still binding, and Carter-Gen is no longer an island. Options elsewhere will be limited." Dylan leaned back, the truth settling in his eyes. "You've been planning this for years." "Not planning," I corrected, slipping the final document into my bag. "Building. While you played, I built, and now I'm giving you the one thing I never received a second chance." I rose, adjusting my jacket as the final word hovered in the room like incense. "You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow to accept. HR will begin onboarding. Decline and security will escort you out." I turned toward the door. "Wait," Chloe said behind me, her voice breaking. "What about Victoria? What are you going to do to her?" I paused with my hand on the door handle. "Victoria made her decisions 15 years ago. Now she'll live with them." I cast a glance over my shoulder, unreadable. "And I suspect she's already watching. Don't bother warning her. She's in a boardroom upstairs right now, waiting to meet the ghost CEO." The second confrontation had already begun in the executive suite on the top floor, where the glass walls framed the San Francisco Bay like a living oil painting. There, Victoria Carter sat radiant and rigid, her pearls glowing against a tailored blazer, unaware that her world was about to fracture. Jenna waited by the door. "They're ready for you, Miss Ray. Shall I announce you?" "No," I said with a quiet smile. "I'll handle this one myself." I pushed the door open. Victoria looked up, her rehearsed charm freezing mid-breath as recognition hit her. Her spine stiffened, but her poise cracked just slightly around the edges. "Good afternoon," I said to the room, though. My gaze remained fixed on her. "I'm Ray, CEO of Novacor Biotech. Some of you might remember me as Avery Lane." Gasps were muffled behind hands. Victoria's notepad trembled in her grip. What followed was not a confrontation, it was a surgical reclamation. I presented the new vision for Carter-Gen modernization, accountability, equity-first restructuring. A dismantling of everything Victoria had used to fortify her control. She sat, frozen, her face a marble mask, as her empire quietly collapsed beneath the weight of truth. The moment the boardroom emptied, and the last murmured pleasantry faded into silence, she attempted her signature vanishing act, slipping behind the suited crowd, retreating into a curtain of exit strategies, as she had done every time the tide turned against her. But not this time. I moved forward, the measured cadence of my heels asserting presence, and said her name. "Victoria." She stopped, her shoulders tightening beneath the silk of her blazer. My voice had landed like a thrown stone in still water. She turned with deliberate slowness, and for the first time in 15 long memory-scarred years, I saw the truth in her expression, neither contempt nor control, but fear fragile and new. How she asked, her voice breathy, barely audible. How did you build Novacor? I didn't move. I simply leaned almost casually against the edge of the table she once ruled from crossing my arms, not in defiance, but in understanding. How did I buy the company you once told me I'd never be good enough for? The way anything meaningful is built through labor, through nights when hope is thinner than breath, through the quiet perseverance of someone no one expected to rise. While you closed doors behind you with smug precision, I found the cracks and built doors of my own. Victoria said nothing, but her posture betrayed her. A stiffening here, a shallow breath there. She was losing her footing in a world she no longer owned. This isn't revenge, I continued, my voice low but certain. It's justice. It's evidence that legacy doesn't come gift-wrapped in bloodlines or last names it's earned. With grit, with grace, with the relentless choice to value substance over spectacle. Her features twitched barely but enough, a fissure in her porcelain facade. What now? She asked, brittle her gaze, seeking something to anchor her. Now, I said, Cartergen will continue as a division of Novacor Biotech. It will stand for something better now. Ethical biotech, community-rooted innovation. Your name won't vanish, Victoria, but it will evolve. She swallowed, her throat visibly tightening. And me? You'll retain a board seat, I replied, with a smile too soft to be mocking. But only as a minority shareholder. Your voice will be heard, just no longer obeyed. Consider it a long overdue lesson in perspective. She turned to leave, shoulders rigid, but something in her silence suggested surrender, not strategy. Oh, and Victoria, I called out as she reached the doorway. She paused. Sunday dinner? I believe I'll be attending after all. The weeks that followed didn't roar with drama, they whispered change through the marble halls and glass offices like a silent storm remaking the landscape. Dylan and Chloe Carter, once disdainful of anything that required more than their surnames, adapted slowly, stiffly at first. But they began to listen, really listen. And in time, they learned the vocabulary of accountability, the cadence of humility. Victoria stayed quieter than anyone had ever seen her, but sometimes across the long conference table, her eyes would meet mine with something that resembled not animosity, but the slow thaw of respect. The media branded it a tale of revenge, but for me the truth was far more sacred. It was restoration. The real triumph wasn't etched in balance sheets or shareholder slides. It was embedded in the cultural marrow of a company that had finally remembered its soul. For the first time in over a decade, the people of Cartergen felt recognized not as pawns, but as partners. That was the legacy I was after. Innovation, integrity, impact. Exactly 1 year after the acquisition, I found myself in my office, its expansive windows casting soft gold over the San Francisco skyline. The quarterly report from Cartergen, now Novacor's proudest subsidiary, lay open in front of me. A 42% rise in profits, achieved not through ruthless trimming or glossy rebrands, but through the very platforms I once designed on a napkin in a Palo Alto cafe. Platforms that put employees first. To my quiet surprise, Dylan was thriving. Without the burden of pretending to be more than he understood, he had discovered something deeper, his capacity to support, to build alongside others. Chloe, too, had transformed, her sharp edges softened by purpose, her insight no longer performative but practical. There was a gentle knock. Jenna's voice followed, steady as ever. Miss Lane, your step-siblings are here for their quarterly review. I nodded, my eyes briefly tracing the curve of the distant horizon. The view had changed. So had we. Send them in. Dylan and Chloe entered not with swagger, but with quiet readiness. No designer watches, no performative charm, just understated professionalism and the humility that comes from honest work. Please have a seat, I said, gesturing toward the chairs opposite mine. Let's talk about your progress. As we walked through their development plans, measuring not just output, but growth, I thought of my mother. She used to say that real success isn't about overpowering others. It's about becoming someone they're willing to hear. I didn't claim Cartergen to crush it. I came to show that merit, not lineage, defines legacy. And perhaps in rebuilding what they nearly razed, we had all become better versions of ourselves, not by force, but by intention. Not for vengeance, for purpose. And in that quiet truth, I found something far more enduring than triumph. If this story stirred something in you, if you've ever felt like the one pushed aside, the one underestimated, know this quiet resilience has its day. I didn't build Novacor Biotech just to rise. I built it to endure, to inspire, to prove that substance will always outlast spectacle. If you believe in stories like this about earned power, slow justice, and the strength in silence, then let your voice be part of it. Tap the like button, subscribe to the channel, and help keep these stories alive. Because legacy isn't inherited, it's earned.